by Judy Heumann. I'm going to read a little bio, and then we'll jump into. Judy will give us a little bit of an introduction, and we'll watch a little bit of a trailer. Judith Heumann is an internationally recognized leader of the disabilities rights movement and the author of Being Human, an unrepentant memoir of a disability rights activist. Published by Beacon Press and audio recorded by Tony Award winner Ali Stroker, the first wheelchair actor to perform on Broadway. Judy is featured in the award-winning 2020 documentary Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution, directed by James Lebrecht and Nicole Newham, and produced by Higher Ground Productions, which is the Obama's production company. She has received numerous awards, including being the first recipient of the Henry B. Betts Award in recognition of efforts to significantly improve the quality of life for people with disabilities, and the Max Starkloff Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Council on Independent Defense. And she has been awarded numerous honorary doctorates. And she spoke in a video on our Friday night service, and hopefully you were able to see that. If not, and you would like to hear it, you can send me an email after this morning, and I can send you a link to our Vimeo, and you can go ahead and watch that from Friday. And thanks to Rabbi Adar, who had led the service on Friday as well. So our goal today and this month really is to make sure that we very intentionally have these conversations so that we continue this work throughout the year, also very intentionally. So I appreciate all of you being here to help us do that. I'll turn it over to Judy.
Just for a few minutes before we go into a dialogue. So we thought, although many of you probably have seen Crip Camp, it's always good to see the trailer and to see that Neil and Denise Jacobson, two very active members of your congregation, are very prominently displayed in the film. And it was a great honor for all of us. We've known each other since I've known Neil since he was 4 or 5. Denise was a little older. And I'm 73 now, so I'm like the grandmother of the two of them. And let's turn it over and watch it.
What, you want me to tell them what happened? Well, 2 people got cramps and they're spreading. We were all very hyper about it. And I have to go shower some people. I'll see you later.
I wanted to be part of the world, but I didn't see anyone like me in it. I hear about a summer camp for the handicapped run by hippies. Somebody said you probably will smoke dope with the counselors, and I'm like, sign me up.
Come to Camp Jeanette and find yourself.
There I was in Woodstock.
You wouldn't be picked to be on a team back home, but at Jeanette, you had to go up to bat.
Even when we were that young, we helped empower each other. It was allowing us to recognize that the status quo is not what it needed to be.
The world always wants us dead. We live with that reality.
At the time, so many kids just like me were being sent to institutions. It was just a continual struggle.
Most disabled people, like myself, are unable to use public transportation.
We needed a civil rights law of our own.
A rehabilitation program has been vetoed by the president because it was cost prohibitive.
We decided we were going to have a demonstration.
You get the call to action, to the barricades.
A small army of the handicapped have occupied this building for the past 11 days.
So many people from Camp Jeanette found their way into the building.
The FBI cut off the phones. The deaf people went, we know what to do. That's how we communicated to the people outside the building. The Black Panther Party would bring a hot meal. We were like this.
We are the strongest political force in this country.
We will no longer allow the government to oppress disabled individuals. And I would appreciate it if you would stop shaking your head in agreement when I don't think you understand what we are talking about.
What we saw at that camp was that our lives could be better.
If you don't demand what you believe in for yourself, you're not going to get it.
I said for pleasure.
Would you like to see the handicapped people depicted as people?
Excuse me?
Okay.
Okay, I'm just making sure that this doesn't keep going. Hold on.
We at Four Ocean.
Judy, you haven't changed a bit.
I keep dyeing my hair. Many years ago, I made a very quick decision. I like my hair darker, so that's the truth.
So the theme for our Shabbat or this weekend was thinking beyond access, and sort of, you know, with the inspiration too of the film and what that discussed. I mean, what would you say? What does that mean to think beyond access?
I think people look at disability, and frequently when committees are being set up, were being set up, some places I guess not yet set up. One of the reasons for the establishment of the committees has been to look at the lack of accessibility in our synagogues, which I don't want to minimize because I think it's very important. But we really need to be looking much more at what we as disabled Jewish people want from our congregations. And in that, I mean, not just that you can open a door, go up a ramp, have a large print book, have braille, have markings, all those things are important. Making sure that someone with autism or an intellectual disability or whatever the disability may be, that there are accommodations that can be made. And certainly where the leadership of the synagogue and the synagogue itself understands the importance of accessibility and can be building it into the budget if that needs to be happening. In many cases, it's really an issue of policy and practice. But at the end of the day, when you talk to disabled people, like we have, just so everybody understands, we've done a number of pre-discussions with Rabbi Ruth and Rabbi Jackie and Neil and Denise. It's been, excuse me one second. I'm in my foyer. It's how people feel welcomed. And I've been doing a lot of these Zoom calls, and I was just on one about an hour and a half ago. And I think what's refreshing in many ways is more disabled people are really speaking up about not wanting to feel like we have to be pleasing non-disabled people. Like we have to be acting like non-disabled people expect us to act. And I think, you know, as a Jewish community, learning is very important. And Rabbi, you know, one of the things that I had mentioned in one of our discussions is there are a growing number of disabled rabbis who are blind and deaf and have autism and physical disabilities. And I really believe that there is a value of looking at how the rabbis can come together to also help teach other rabbis, both about the Torah and other work that we use in our regular religious teachings, as well as, excuse me, I'm really sorry. Theater, we gotta go home. I gotta go home right now.
So actually just in this break, I'm gonna just make sure that everyone stays muted just so that we don't have a lot of background noise. And so later on, if we have the discussion, then I'll invite you to unmute yourself at that time.
So, because when I think we're speaking to individual rabbis, for example, who have disabilities, they're able to really speak about their own personal experiences. In some cases, growing up with a disability, actually many of the people that I know had their disabilities really almost from birth or like in their teens or 20s. And I think their ability to look at scriptures, their ability to talk about how the messages that we're getting are not necessarily reflecting us as disabled individuals as equal contributory members. But I think really what I found more and more interesting is how when a group of disabled people come together, like at Camp Jeanette, and can really have honest discussions like you and Neil and I and Ruth have been having, you really learn more about what people want. So for me, going to synagogue is something which is personal. I like going because I like being around other people. I like listening and learning and talking about various issues. But I also know that I frequently will only gravitate towards a certain number of people that I feel like I've been able to develop more of a relationship with, or they have someone in their family who has a disability and subsequently are really able to understand how we don't want to feel different. You know, I may be in a wheelchair, Ruth walks and uses a scooter, Neil and Denise use wheelchairs and both have speech disabilities. But one of the things that people have talked a lot about with the film is how everybody listened to each other. And why was that? My response to that is, I learned when I started going to special ed classes, where many of the students in the classes had cerebral palsy, that what people had to say was interesting when I was 9, 10 years old. And so I wanted to talk with them because it was interesting. And I think we didn't have any learning activity. It was just natural, you know, children being together. But I think in many cases, because the media has not really exposed general society to people with hidden and visible disabilities in a regular way, from different racial backgrounds, different sexual orientations, on and on. We're still pretty novel. And people are afraid of disability. People are afraid of acquiring disabilities, as opposed to, in my view, getting behind the issue and learning, yes, disability is a normal part of life. So what is it that we need to be doing? You know, people know that you want to save some money. You don't want to have no money every month, if that's at all possible. So there are things you need to do. You need to plan for getting older. You need to plan for getting older, where that can mean you may have vision issues, hearing issues, physical disability issues, mental health issues, whatever it may be, but planning and working with disabled people and learning about it. And I guess another point that we've been talking about is the work that the synagogue does and other synagogues are doing in the area of social justice. And really, I think a couple of things. One is, what can each Jewish institution do to make it clear to partners that disabled people are an equal part of the work that's being done? That when we're working on issues like Black Lives Matter, we are including disabled Black Lives Matter. When we are looking at Latinx and Indigenous, on and on, we need to be raising the issue of disability. How are disabled people from these different communities a part both of the work that we're doing through our respective synagogues and temples, as well as how are other organizations including people? There's a lot of learning to be done. And, you know, on this previous session that I was listening to, one of the speakers said, he's a lawyer, not disabled, been working in disability, that he had predicted in 1995 that 15 years after the ADA, basically everything would be okay. There'd be no more discrimination. Things would be where we wanted. Well, he really learned that that wasn't true. that is not a surprise to the Ruths, Neils, Denise, myself, and others, because we've looked at this issue as discrimination. And if you look at discrimination, intentional or not, you look at it in all the areas that we've been discussing, discrimination doesn't go away overnight. Because why does discrimination happen? Because of bias, because of prejudice, because of fear, whatever it may be. People need to learn how what they know is wrong. And people need to learn what needs to be changed. And people need to learn that the voices of people who have been experiencing discrimination need to be in leadership roles and making decisions on what needs to happen. And in the area of disability, I think, you know, people really feel, many, that this is a medical issue, put money into research, disability will go away, we don't need to think about it. And the reality is disability is a normal part of life. We may be able to do research and address certain types of disabilities, but disability is caused by so many things that it will always be here. And our goal really should be that people can be equal members of society, not that the way we address the problem is to get rid of us.
Judy, I have two questions. Okay. One is our synagogue, like many of the synagogues, still in our education program, we still label it as addressing issues of kids with special needs. Could you comment on why that term feeds into the problem?
I mean, I'm happy to, but you go first.
Huh?
You go first.
No, I
Okay. I don't like the term special needs, and I think Denise doesn't either. Because I don't like anything where we are by labels being separated out. The word disabled or people with disabilities, I use disabled people. That I feel is appropriate. We want to identify ourselves, you know, as Jews, as women, as Jewish women, as women who are Jewish, whatever it may be, women of color who are Jewish, whatever. But the term special needs is not a positive word. When the word special comes around disability, we always know it's like run for the hills. It's a way of separating people out. And so I feel we need to be talking about students with disabilities, disabled students, and what we need to be talking about is what do the individual students need in order to be able to be successful in whatever program they're involved with, what types of training do the teachers need, supports. And I think it's very important also to be working with the other students, with the disabled students, to be able to have discussions like we are on racism and sexism. We need discussions on ableism. We need people to be able to really look at and learn about the types of experiences where discrimination has played an unfortunate part of our lives, so that people understand both what it is, what remedies are, and individual people and families can look at what role they have played in either ignoring something that needs to be addressed, participating in something, bullying, for example. And as a community, we need to be addressing these issues. So special education is something that most people are not running towards. And why is that? Because too frequently it's not superior. If special education was superior, people would want in. But too frequently, special education, I don't want to be saying anything in a negative way towards teachers, because many people in the area of special education are good teachers and they want to be working in more inclusive settings, etc. So I'm talking about a system which is not in many ways really yet addressing the depth of the needs of what has to happen. And why is that a problem? It's a problem because kids who have disabilities may not be being identified, may not be getting the supports that they need. We need, as a society, to be addressing the whole issue of financing for education, including financing education for disabled children and Title I children as a part of a package deal. And ultimately, media needs to be playing a much bigger role. We need to be able to allow people, like when you watch Crip Camp, when you read my book, when you read Alice Wong's anthology, on and on, when you're learning more about different people of different types of disabilities and what our own personal experiences are and what we believe needs to happen, just like in any of the other areas we're working on, that's where we begin to make change. And I think within the synagogues, we need a conscious effort when we're having our committees or our task forces, whatever they're being called. We need to be looking, as we started out, Rabbi, as talking about where are we from the accessibility perspective, but what more do we need to do? How are we integrating disability? So how many speakers do we have come in a year? Are we bringing in speakers who may be talking on disability, but may have a disability and be an expert in a completely different area? How do we really, how do we make the message that we're trying to give one which is seen both within this case, your temple, and more broadly by the organizations you work with and the communities overall? So I think if you're working, for example, with interfaith groups, then bringing this up as a discussion to look at what needs to be done. And each community can be doing things that are specifically related to that religious community, but also I think coming together. And, you know, JDAM is a once a year activity in February, but it's something that we really don't want to only be discussing in February.
Yeah. So I see there are a few questions. I'm actually going to ask you to hold them for just a minute because I know that there's a few other things that we want to be able to address. I mean, Judy, what you're saying, I think people love checklists, right? So if we can get like, here's a ramp checklist, right? Here's a, somebody who's signing during services, it's kind of a checklist. And then what you're talking about is something that runs much deeper, and it's a mindset. And to shift a mindset then would also help, right? Sort of, these other pieces of it. And I had the question, if learning differences is also the same kind of poetic wash, because that's what I know just as a Chinese Jew, that the term people of color or Jew of color is highly problematic because it's just like this poetic wash over things. So I wonder if it's the same, learning differences.
I think so.
Okay. I appreciate it.
I think, at the end of the day, people are going to decide what they want to call themselves. Broadly speaking, disabled people, people with disabilities. And then, some people, I've got a learning disability. I've got this, I've got that. Great. That's something that I think is important, that many people, especially, and I want to say especially, but including people with invisible disabilities. So, when I speak with people who have invisible disabilities, how do they become visible? They need to be able to feel comfortable that they can use a term and that they can, if they feel it's appropriate, explain what it means. So I think that's very important when we recognize that so many people have invisible disabilities and the stigma that is attached with disability overall. And so somebody asked, what is a positive name for special education? Well, I'd say education, right? It's education. So it doesn't need a name. I mean, I'm sure most people don't agree with me on this, but you have education and you want education to be formulated so that all children benefit. You don't give a label for what each kid is getting. You want teachers who are trained, right? So if you have a child who's having difficulty learning to read, you want to know that the general ed teacher has been given appropriate training to be able to work with students who may have difficulty starting to read. But then there may be children who have disabilities or not that are having more difficulty, and you want to be able to bring people in who are more skilled and knowledgeable about how to work with students to help them learn to read and to work with their families, etc. So I don't know, what would you call that? You call it a specialist in reading. You don't give the kid the label, you elevate the status of the person who's doing the work, right? Like when you take an AP class, the class is looked at in a different way. But when you say special ed class, it's not looked at like an AP class. I think the name itself just really shows you that.
Yeah. Neil wrote to add to the conversation, Judy, we agree that children with disabilities should be in integrated schools, but I don't know whether I'd be where I am without you, Hafi, Mike, and the other disabled kids. What do kids do today to meet other disabled kids?
I mean, I think that's a very good point, and I think about it a lot. Certainly, one thing I would say about the special ed classes that we went to is that the teaching was very subpar. And that's not really what we were there for. I knew more when I went from home instruction. It was just me and my mother, and it wasn't a formalized homeschooling. The teacher coming in 2.5 hours a week and my reading a lot. I've never learned I never learned how to really parse a sentence, or I'm not a good one to look at nouns and pronouns and verbs. We never learned that. And then when we went to high school, there was a presumption that you knew it, and I didn't know it, and I was always nervous and afraid. So Neil's point is, if we didn't know each other when we were kids, where would it be today? And I think really, in some way, we look at the kids today like ourselves, who are more likely now to be in a regular ed class. And what we're seeing is many of these kids definitely need to be able to identify both kids their own age as well as adults, because as I keep saying, the absence of disabled people in media, whether it's advertising, television, movies, documentaries, journalism, the news, blah, blah, blah. When we don't see ourselves, neither do other people. And, then we're absent. So I think camps are certainly, integration of disabled kids in camps is important, allowing people to have time to come together. And I think it's a very important issue to discuss. The Jewish camps, many of the kids that go to the Jewish camps are not in Jewish day schools, right? They come together in the summer because their families want them to have an experience. Well, there are ways to do the same thing. Some states like California have had these programs where kids come together for like a week, and social media, I think, has been helping, where people are setting up, YouTube and Facebook. But I think it's a very relevant question. But I don't think the answer is we go back to separate schools or separate classes. I mean, the reality is, I'm not labeling myself like I would label Neil. Like, Neil is amazing in math. And Neil clearly did not become amazing in math because of anything he learned in PS 219. Is that right, Neil? Yeah, you did not learn to excel in PS 219 in math. Did you? You're muted.
He put it in the chat. No.
Yeah. So I think for those of us who had families who were good in that and work with us, we had our own interests, whatever it may be, but there were too many kids in those programs who, I mean, I was the first kid in our elementary special ed classes to go to high school. First, other kids went, well, if you used a wheelchair like us, you went back on home instruction, or you stayed in the program that Neil and I were in. The majority of kids stayed there until they were 21, and then they went to sheltered workshops. It was the exception.
But in my school, I was like one of a kind. So there was no other kid in my grade level. So I got a lot of attention, and I learned how to pause a sentence. I learned how to do math. I learned science, but I was still very isolated.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depended on the program you were in, which is probably true for any school. But all I can say is that many of the kids who were in special ed, and like the classes that Neil and I were in, when I became a teacher, so I was in that school till I was 12. I became a teacher when I was 21 or 22. They were still using the same robo papers. They were not using the same textbooks as the kids in the regular school. The teachers were not being evaluated by the principal like the regular ed teachers were. And that was just the way it was. Now, at that point, kids were not staying in the classes until they were 21. But I don't exactly know where they were going. But I think the bottom line is we need high expectations for all children, regardless of the significance of the child's disability. And, you know, we're learning more and more as technology is out there. The technology is really a godsend for kids who maybe, you know, have difficulty communicating on and on. And the work that's going on for people with learning disabilities and various types of learning disabilities. But we need a society that believes that children can learn and that all children can learn, because it's not just disabled children that are failing. It's also poor and minority kids who come to school without having many deficits because of poverty, and how then those kids get labeled and are not being appropriately taught. So I just think that Neil's point of we need, as disabled kids and adults, to be able to come together, to work together, learn together, create opportunities, empower people. I think that's very important. And I do think it's still happening in many ways, increasing. And in many other ways, people don't really find each other till later on. So, but I think, you know, the point that we're discussing today is really synagogues, temples, the Jewish community, and what as a community we're doing, both within our own religious institutions, to really elevate this discussion. And I think, you know, another point is immigrants from other countries, in some cases, are bringing the biases that they grew up with. And also, frequently families are afraid of speaking up. So kids who may have a disability who could be benefiting with different laws. Their families may not know about these laws and how they can benefit them. So there are just so many opportunities out there, and no one is going to be flipping their organizations, whether it's a synagogue, a temple, or a community-based group, just to be doing work on disability. But what I like to talk about is putting a disability lens on the work that is being done, talking to disabled people, both within this case, the temples and synagogues, and within the communities overall, and really beginning to have some honest discussions about what people are feeling and about what people want. And don't expect that that's going to happen, in 1 minute. I did something on Friday night, and the rabbi gave this really, I thought, very impressive commentary on standing. And it was more than, rise in spirit and body, whatever the words are. He really gave an explanation about what the purpose of prayer was. And I thought it was really very valuable, really high quality. And I wrote him in the chat, and it turns out he's got a disabled daughter. And then I thought, yeah, of course. Anyway, I thanked him, and I said, this is something that you should say on a regular basis. Not exactly the same way, change it however you want, but it should be, a theme about what is prayer, and getting up, if you can, is fine. But if you can't, like for me, I never was able to get up. So I was always different and always felt that, not getting up was, made me somehow inferior. And, kids shouldn't feel like that. And I just think that it's on the one hand, something which is small, but on the other hand, it's large. And Addis Israel had a deaf rabbi yesterday speaking. And, the issue of captioning and sign language interpreting, deaf community is not that large. And, in many areas, they're doing their own thing. But really learning from the community what it is they're doing, what it is they may want to do with the synagogues in the area. Because, from my perspective, many of the synagogues, including yours, have very interesting people who come and speak over the year. And so maybe they don't want to come to services. Maybe, the deaf and hard of hearing community want to be with their own community now, because they speak the same language, etc. But they may want to come together to participate in other activities. And we don't really know, because we really haven't had those discussions. And I think the same is true for people with intellectual disabilities, how, frequently they're kind of merged together and come together as a group sometimes to the synagogues. But families, you really want to know from the families, what do they feel like they're getting or not getting from, a particular religious institution. And the Jewish Federation and the RAC and many other groups, these are potentially places to have more in-depth discussions, which I think should also include who is doing what. Because it's not that nobody is doing anything, everybody is doing something. And knowing more about what people are doing and how they're doing it, I think is really important, how we can share.
Thank you so much, Judy. I know that Denise has a story. Some of the subtleties that we've been talking about. Denise has a story of something within our own community to share, and then I think we'll go to some questions.
So I've been a member of Sinai for over 25 years. and I've been on committees. I participated in services, and at the formal gatherings, I'm very included. But when the gatherings are over, I feel like people run away from me. There were a number of times I stayed for a kiddish lunch, and nobody says a seat at the table or made room for me at a table when I participated in Shabbat services after the meeting broke up. I would see other women talking to each other and making times to get together, but that never happened to me. I've also had experiences where I was talking to somebody and people came up and interrupted as if the conversation I was having with somebody didn't matter. And so after all these years, I still feel I'm not really a part of the community. I'm like an afterthought. Could you comment on or talk about how we could change that kind of behavior, that kind of culture?
Do you want me to interpret? To summarize?
Did people get that?
Does anybody want me to summarize what Denise said? Just if one of you writes yes, I'll do it.
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'll do my very best, Denise. So Denise says that she and Neil have been members of the congregation for 25 years and that she participates in many formal sessions. And after the formal sessions, when things break into subgroups, whether it's kiddish or whatever, people don't, as a rule, like make a place for her at a table. I'm saying this, Denise didn't say this, inviting her to come over to the table. There's kind of no like real connection of Denise feeling like she belongs. And she may be having discussions with somebody, and someone might come over and interrupt as if, the discussion that she was having with the other person was not happening or wasn't important, that they could just run over you. And so after 25 years, if she's feeling like this, what is it that should be done? So of course, I am the goddess of the world. I will now throw down fairy dust and I'll get rid of all the problems of the world. So, I mean, I think, I know that Denise has thoughts, and if I ask her to express them, she's gonna say she asked me the question. So I will, give my thoughts. My thoughts are, these discussions are very helpful because, I know that it's difficult for me, for Neil, Denise, for Ruth, and other people who are on, who have visible and invisible disabilities, to frequently speak about this. I either read something or heard something on NPR this morning about a group of Black writers who were talking about how they are not writing or thinking in a way that would make white people feel comfortable. They're just doing their thing. And I thought, wow, that's really great, because that's really a lot about what we're talking about, which is, who are we and how do we want to be? And how do we want to be seen? And I think, Jews are a minority group in general, and we're a minority in a minority. And we are so many different types of disabled people. When we get our disabilities, as we've been saying, there are different reasons, different times, and we really don't have this level of a discussion. And I think this level of a discussion is really what we need to be having. We're not all going to agree with each other about what we say, but I can say with the number of synagogues that I've been speaking to this month, so I'd say 8 to 10, there's kind of a common thread from the disability community. And that is that we don't feel like we can be ourselves. We feel like, I'll just speak for myself. I feel like you're kind of a little bit on exhibition. And the more people see me and others, the more they're like beginning to learn that we have similar interests and strengths and weaknesses as others. But, you're not like with everybody every day. You get together at most once a week. And certainly now it's not even that. And so that's why I think really the ability to have learning opportunities, and not just about disability, because it is going on within other components of the Jewish communities in synagogues, depending on where we're located. I think learning from each other about, how people of color who are Jewish are feeling, what they're doing, how they're both coming together. And Rabbi, I'm sorry I didn't get to listen to the event on Friday, but I think that would be really important for people to learn about. So it's naming it. It's saying that we know this is an issue. That I think one of the most important things is for people to feel welcome. And for me, feeling welcomed is to be able to have a discussion like this. And it's not like you walk through the door on a Shabbat whenever we do that again. And now that we can't do it at all, it's like really, I think, more problematic. You don't come in and say, okay, what do you think about me and my wheelchair? I look at it with the look. I look at it with, for me, when it's winter, someone coming over to me and saying, would you like me to help you get your coat off? Would be like a big blessing. And for me to feel like I could say to somebody, I want to go now. Can you please help me get my coat on? Because for me, I live in DC. When it's cold outside, I'm more often not going to synagogue, because unless I know somebody is going to be there that is willing to help me, where I also don't feel like they're doing something special for me and talking to other people about helping me, I kind of would like it to be seamless, you know? And I just think having the discussions is important. And I think also, with children and with teenagers, really learning about how to have these discussions. Because whether they're on gender or on race or religion or what disability, they are important discussions. How are we looking at how to begin discussions in general? How do we have hard discussions? And I think it's something that we, in general, it's difficult to have. So I would say it's really, the more it can be focused on the community that you're in. I mean, obviously, I go to my synagogue. I love my synagogue. There are things at my synagogue around disability that in some way I've just said, whatever. But I don't really feel good about that. It's just like I said in the very beginning. I know why I go to synagogue. And I do have some friends. And I've really worked on getting friends. And, one of the things about not just the Jewish community, but communities, and I think, Denise said this the other day, and that is that, and I think you were saying it today also, people will set up times to do other things together. Go to a movie, go shopping, go to your house, play a game. And when you're not included in it, that feels badly. I ran for office in Berkeley and I didn't win, but I was at a party for everybody in this group that I ran with. And there was a circle of people and we were talking, and then the discussion started gravitating towards going to the movies. And it was very clear to me as the discussion was moving forward that there was no interest in talking about anything related to what I might need to go to the movies, like accessibility and because I said something and it was kind of ignored. And I remember going home that night to call my friend Kitty that Neil and Denise knew, of blessed memory. And I said, Kitty, am I a Martian? And I talk about that all the time. Am I a Martian? And I use that phrase because that's kind of like what I felt. Was I so different from everybody else? But it was very clear that I did not, I could have easily said, I would like to go to the movies with you. Let's find an accessible theater. But quite frankly, I thought, I don't really want to be with these people if they don't consciously say, would you like to go to a movie? And what theaters are accessible? That didn't happen. And so I kind of left the discussion. And I don't think, it's certainly just not in synagogues. I hated going to any event that was mainly non-disabled people because I knew I wouldn't know many of them. Everybody was standing. I could draw a diagram of everybody's butt because that's what I was seeing. And why was I going? And when I worked in the Clinton administration and I had a senior position, I finally said to myself, this is not about Judy. This is about the assistant secretary. And as the assistant secretary, you need to be there. And so I would go to these events. I would try to drag somebody with me who I could talk with, just so, it's kind of like being a little kid and going in this big room. Mm. Only difference is you're not looking for your mother, but you're definitely looking for somebody. Oh, dear God, is there somebody here that I know? So I can say I was here and talk to someone else. It's the same thing that Denise was talking about at Kiddush. You know, when you come in the room, you want to feel, and it's like, I know, Denise, you know a lot of people, right? So there's something there that just doesn't connect. And it doesn't mean that you're not close with people at the synagogue. But you know, having some friends now at the synagogue where I've been able to have some of these discussions more one-on-one, as a, you know, people know, and we're friends, so, you know, we'll find each other. But it is really building a bridge that you can get across. I know I'm speaking a lot on this, but I think there's no easy answer. But I do think there needs to be a discussion.
Well, and I think, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Certainly families who have kids talk about this all the time. You know, how are their kids being accepted, on and on.
Well, and I appreciate, as you said, it may not be only in the synagogue, but as a synagogue, right, we want to be a community in a different kind of way. And so that's why it's such an important piece for us to think about. 2 questions. I appreciate your patience. First from Alita, and then from Andrew.
Thank you. I appreciate you touching on earlier about people with, quote, invisible disabilities. You know, I can go in the New York City subway and climb stairs with the rest of them. But yet I get stink eye on the trains and on the buses because I use the sideways facing seats. So I have disabilities from military service that can't be seen. So I think, how can we educate people, whether they be station agents or people in businesses or people in temple, synagogues, churches, etc., to be aware of the disabilities that we cannot see, so that we can't, you know, the idea of automatically being assumed able is hurtful to me. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Alita.
Yeah,
I'm wondering, actually, let's have Andrew and Lynn just share their question, and then we can, yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you asked that question, because I'm a physician, and one of the moments sort of that changed my way of being a doctor was when I decided to treat every patient that I saw from a trauma-informed perspective, and that sort of sense of humility of not knowing what it is that my patients need of me. And I think that in terms of a way to change the culture in a community like this is adopting a similar approach, which is every single person has some kind of special need. You just don't know what it is yet. And I think it also resonates in terms of the fact that everybody will be disabled at some point. That nobody gets out of here without being disabled. And this idea of approaching everyone with a sense of humility and not knowing what it is that they need, regardless of whether their disability is visible or invisible, trauma or whatever, has radically changed the way that I interact with the world. And that paradigm shift is something that we can incorporate into all of our educational opportunities for our children, which and I think they'll probably be a lot easier to adopt that framework than adults. But for me, that's how that's the paradigm that I use when I am working with people.
And I think, what did you call it? Special what?
It's a trauma-informed care. It's a way of providing care to people. And
when
it's
you use the term, you use the word special, and I would just say, instead of special, I would use personal.
Yeah.
Because I think the point that I liked about what you were saying is you're looking at each person individually and assuming that as a doctor, it would be good for you to have a better understanding of who that person is, right? And what are some of the things that are triggers for them.
Yeah, what's their need? What their need is, and I don't know what that need is.
And you probably won't learn it the first time you meet them, right? Because you have to have knowledge and trust in them, and they have to have equal trust and knowledge about you. I think that's a very important way. And I would say, Andrew, that there, you know, there isn't a way of magically getting everybody to understand what you're discussing. But over time, I mean, the reason why I talk about media broadly speaking as being something which is very important is because people need to learn about issues that we are all dealing with. And one of them, as you said, is not everyone is the same, and we shouldn't presume certain things. I think it's also that it's valuable, you know, when we're going to school with other people, whether we're working with other people, whether in community with other people, being able to talk about who we are and what makes us happy, what, you know, is frustrating for us. That's all very important, because that's the way, you know, the people that you know will be learning from you and then can share that message with other people. And I think it's really important for training, you know, that bus drivers and people working on the trains, et cetera, need to be learning about in their basic training, you know, in shopping centers, et cetera. Yeah, I think slowly over time, because we are way behind where other communities are, but that's also why I think it's so very important for us to be looking at all the other communities that are fighting for rights, you know, because there are Black disabled individuals of all forms of disabilities, Latinx disabled people, white people, you know, indigenous people, LGBTQ, and then mixtures of all the above. And really, we need to have a mixture in our community for discussions so that, you know, we're really looking at systemic changes, which will not be easy, but which can occur.
And do you have any additional thoughts in terms of Alita's thinking about the sort of the invisible disabilities? And
could you say that again?
So Alita was just asking about the invisible disabilities. And she brought up again, right, a little bit in the chat, but the question was, you know, is there, Alita, do you want to restate the question?
Yeah, I think you really answered it well. I just forgot to mention that I, in the LGBT realm, if you will, it's doubly challenging that that I'm interacting with people that I have not only invisible disabilities, but that my credibility in that is questioned again because I'm an LGBT person who's wearing a skirt. So that's kind of a double whammy, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Which is why, you know, the LGBTQ community really needs to understand issues that you're discussing. You know, we belong to multiple communities, and we need those communities to be working with us, learning with us, and being advocates with us.
Yeah, thank you. Are there other questions? If you want to, I've got my gallery screen up, so if you want to alert me.
Elaine Pomerantz, hi Elaine, said, one can always ask, can I help with anything? Which I think is good. You know, Elaine, I was saying at our synagogue on Shabbat, every Shabbat we make an announcement that if someone needs help at Kiddush, there are people there who can help. So we want people that are there, the catering staff, to, as they're walking around, just ask, you know, can I help you at a table? So if someone needs help, they can get it. Or I know, to ask for help, and more people are doing that. Come in. Welcome to our foyer.
I have a comment about that. I think we tried to establish that many years ago, and it didn't catch on because it has to be part of the culture and philosophy of the synagogue. I think the temple community has to look at the issues that we're raising and really go deep into trying to understand where they're coming from, so that the community can buy into it.
Yeah, thank you, Denise.
Did everybody get the Rabbi? Could you summarize that?
So unfortunately, I also had my eye on the chat a little bit. So my concentration was a little bit split.
Thank you for saying that. What I said was that the community has to buy into.
The community has to buy into what it is that you're trying to address, right? There has to be ownership.
Yeah, ownership.
Yeah, what else?
Well, and that's what Linda was actually talking about in the chat. I feel like half the onus is on me to enable people to begin to get over their discomfort or those things, right? So that it has to be an entire community that takes responsibility in order to move forward or to make change or to change the culture.
I don't agree with that. Half of the onus is on me to enable people to begin to get over their discomfort. I don't take any ownership in it. I mean, personally, you may not like me as a person, right? So I think we have to kind of distinguish. Because I have a disability, you don't have to like me, right? I don't have to like you because you don't have a disability. Our politics may be different. The way you raise your kids may be different. I don't like the way you use, whatever it may be. We're not coming in here and saying as Jews, we have to be best friends. What we are saying is that as Jews with disabilities, we want to feel respected. And I don't know exactly what it means that I have to half of the onus. Just the use of the word onus is something which is very negative, is on you or on me as a disabled person to enable people to begin to get over their discomfort. I feel like if you feel discomfort around being around me, and it's because I have a disability, you may ask me certain questions that I may or may not wish to answer, but it is not my responsibility to kind of have some kind of radar to figure out who doesn't feel comfortable around me, or Denise, or anybody with a mental health issue, whatever. I think the reason why I don't think it should be left on the individual person to take this big issue. You know, it's like if you're a Black person, it's not your responsibility to make a white person feel comfortable with you. You know, it's the community's responsibility, the group's responsibility to kind of get a better understanding of, you know, what is your bias and prejudice that you assume automatically because someone is a different color or a different religion or whatever it may be, that they're inferior to you. Because that's really what it's about. And I'm inferior to some people, you know, who know basketball or soccer or football or other things that I don't really know. And, you know, I had a friend from the synagogue who had ALS, and I was spending time with him, and we were trying, he didn't have a disability before, but he was an avid baseball fan. And so we started bonding around baseball because he was teaching me baseball. So, you know, I was able to make jokes about how bad I was in baseball. And then the year this was going on was also the year that the Nationals won the World Series. And it was great. And we had this really great time together. Unfortunately, he passed away. But I didn't feel it was an onus. Yeah, I don't like. Yeah, sorry. But I think it's a very important point. I think really feeling like it's my responsibility to figure out why someone feels that I'm lesser than they am. I have better things to do with my life.
Thank you, Judy. I want to recognize the time, and if anyone is feeling zoomed out and you need to drop off, we completely understand. I think we'll maybe try to go another 5 minutes or so because we have a few more questions, but we are recording it and we'll post it later if you'd like to hear the end of the conversation. So just want to let everybody know that we appreciate you being here. And if you have to log off at this point, we understand. Elise, you have a question?
It's actually more of a comment. My spouse suffers from multiple invisible disabilities. Both think she has a serious back injury that causes chronic pain. But the issue that ends up coming up more than anything is that she also has PTSD from her military service. And we recently had an experience in a store where we were in the checkout line, and her service dog, who is a 11-pound poodle, a definitely non-threatening animal, was in a basket in the shopping cart. And he had no physical contact with the shopping cart whatsoever. And as we were leaving the store, a plainclothes security guy started hassling her about it. And it totally triggered her PTSD. And she ended up having a rough time the whole rest of the week. And to me, the issue was about respect. And I think with people with mental health issues, the most important thing is respect. And I think Judy is saying the same thing about physical things, is that we have to learn how to respect each other in a real deep way.
Yeah, and I think also, thank you for sharing that. So did you speak to the management of the store about this?
We did at the time. I'm not sure that they entirely got it, and I've thought about going back there because it's a place we go to regularly. And in general, the people are really good. And part of what was so bizarre about it was that a whole bunch of employees had seen us prior to us being in the checkout counter, and they were like, "Oh, he's so sweet, and everything is fine." And this guy took it upon himself, and we were told by an employee later that he can be aggressive. And I think that sort of also points out some of the stuff that's going on with law enforcement and people with mental health issues, is that if you're aggressive, it's going to trigger people.
Yeah. But I think it's also important, like you said, that you said something. And I think it gets to a point that Alita was making earlier, which is, what kind of training are staff getting? So using this as an experience of inappropriate behavior on the part of an employee or a contractor of the particular business, and learning about what they were trying to say and how they could have said it differently, and whether what they wanted to say was in fact consistent with policies of the company. So, you know, we don't have to get into discussing the issue of the dog or where the dog was, whether it's appropriate or not, whatever. It kind of doesn't matter. What does matter is the way the person approached you, which was inappropriate. And if in fact you have PTSD or some other mental health, you know what? You don't even have to have a label, because everything going on now with COVID and people not being out a lot and doing things, that kind of behavior can be startling and disengaging. And so I think, you know, looking at a way to have a bigger discussion relating to how you were approached and how employees should be trained about how to approach customers is a relevant discussion.
Thank you. So Neil writes in the chat, I felt more accepted at Wells Fargo than most other places. We were there to do a job. When the systems broke at 3 a.m, the computer operator that called me for help figured out how to understand me. So the idea that, right, that Neil, and we've had this conversation before, feeling needed and recognizing that you were the person who had the expertise here, right, was a significant piece. And the conversation, it seems, between Elaine and Linda, or at least Elaine and Linda have been writing a lot about it, is sort of the difficulty with, this goes back to the, you know, asking if I can help, or if I can help you with your jacket, or things like that, that it winds up being that sometimes those things can be uncomfortable. You have to build relationships with people and connect with people, and then you understand, right, people's needs, or people's preferences, or those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I also think that that's very true. Building personal relationships, it also can be something that can be discussed, you know, more broadly. You know, at least where I go, when we're there are people there as greeters, and so I can be like we did with the help for food. It could also be that if you're a greeter, if someone may need help, you can ask, could I help you with your coat? Now, one of the problems with the greeters, not a problem, but they greet you, there's nobody there when you leave. So you're greeted and someone can help you get your coat off, but then who's there to help you get your coat back on? So, I mean, these are like not many people who have this issue, but, you know, having these kinds of discussions. I remember thinking, you know, there were some people at the synagogue who were there for many, many years. And as they were getting older, some of them were having more difficulty getting their coats on and off. And some of them were also having difficulty getting their tallis on. And I would have, if it would have made any difference, gone over and asked, could I help you with your talit? But A, I was very short, and B, I can't lift up my arms. So all I would have been able to say is, if you need help with your talit, I'll go get somebody. But that was kind of like silly, right? Because, but I think those kinds of things that we don't really think about, but just like standing why we stand, and if we don't, you're not going to hell, or wherever we go, or whatever happens, you know, it's not a bad or a good thing. It's you do, you know, when you're entering prayer, how do you want to come into it? And I think it's a combination of many things that deal with visible and invisible disabilities, which does not solve the overall issue that we're trying to address beyond the barriers, but it does begin to have a discussion. You know, I think we were talking the other day, and like we've done today with Denise, is feeling like it is okay if you're talking with someone who has a speech disability or whatever, and you can't, like for me, because my hearing in loud in, settings where there's a lot of noise, I frequently have to ask people, could you say it again? Or could you go lower and say it again? I think frequently people feel uncomfortable asking people to say something again. And I think, Denise today in this back and forth that we had was very important, and really when Denise started speaking, I had the 5-year-old kid in the background and I thought, oh my God, I've missed part of what Denise was saying. But, it's like, that is okay. It's when you're in the group that it's okay to say, I'm sorry, like the rabbi did. I got distracted by blah, blah, blah. Could you repeat it? And Denise said, yeah, thanks for saying that. Because that's life. It's the act of feeling comfortable in asking that makes it helpful. And then I think, whatever the situation may be, it also becomes something which is not just the responsibility for the disabled person. It becomes more of a communal, that I want to know what you've said, you want to know what Neil or Dee said or whoever. And therefore it is important for us to listen and or to ask, could you say it again?
Judy, I want to thank you so much for your time, not just
thanks Denise and Neil and all of you.
Well, not just this morning though, but over the past few weeks, you spent a lot of time with us, getting to know us, and I really, really appreciate that. And yes, a huge thank you to Neil and Denise, Helen and Ruth, all part of the leadership of bringing this together. So thank you all so much, and the conversation continues. So
thank you all very much. Someday I've been to your shul before, so I look to come back again.
We look forward to it.
Sooner than later, I hope. Bye, everybody.
I want to say goodbye to everybody, especially my Jeanette friends. It's been a wonderful morning.
Nice, Debbie.
Well,
Nice,
from
Debbie.
one Janetta to another, we're here because we're here.
I know.
I just want to say that if people have any thoughts about the program or what we talked about, please email me so that we can continue this discussion. And thank everyone for coming.
Can I put your email in the chat?
Yes.
Denise said if you have any comments that you want to make, please send them to her for follow-up, for just general comments. When to have a party.
The Gmail, here's the Gmail address there for Denise.
No.
Nope.
Do my AOL.
Okay, sorry.
70@AOL.com.
Okay, ignore the first one. Here's the second one. You can also email me and connect with me as well.
They put your email in too, Rabbi.
And it's a ways off, but we're going to be having a book discussion of Judy's book come June. I'm going to be facilitating that discussion. But so you've got plenty of time to buy her book and read her book and have many questions and opinions and good thoughts about it.
You can also get it on audio. It's read by Ali Stroker. Try to get it from your local bookstore.
It's fabulous on audio. She
Okay.
really embodies you, feisty.
Yeah, she's great. She's my sister. All right, everybody.
That Rabbi Adar.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.
You've got a typo in your email address.
Ruth, I love your hat.
Rabbi.
Oh, thank you. It covers a multitude of sins.
There is a typo in my email address. I'll put it in one more time.
Thank you all again.
Thank you so much.
It's been great to meet you and work with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My niece Kim, good
Thank
to see you.
you.
Thanks for being here, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you, Reva.
I always think it says a lot when people want to hang on to the very end. Have a good week, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.